Adolf Hitler neither finished school nor had any vocational training. He occasionally lived in homeless shelters or on the street. He refused to pursue a regular job. To this day, it seems inexplicable that he could come to power. Out of nowhere, Hitler became the Führer, leader of the German Reich, one of the most powerful men of the 20th century who brought the world to the brink of disaster and death to millions of people. The nation worshipped him and followed him blindly into the abyss. But during his lifetime, he kept his origins and his life secret. No one should know how or who he was. Hitler's contemporaries, from his birth to his death, flesh out the picture. Who was Hitler?
He has managed to captivate his people using a mystical band that is not even dependent on the National Socialist Party that helped him into power. I often have the opportunity to experience this, indeed in all social circles. Robert Coulondre, French ambassador to Berlin, 1938 and 1939.
Krakow lies near the German border. Whenever we came up to the border, several in the group broke away, ran across the borderline, and kissed the German earth. Later, I learned that these children were ethnic Germans who were raised to love Germany. Ruth Elias, Czech Jew.
Diary, Monday, September the 12th, 1938. In the evening, we heard the close of the party convention in Nuremberg. Adolf Hitler called on President Benesch. If the Sudeten Germans are not protected, we know what we have to do. God preserve the existing peace. Diary, Tuesday, September the 27th, 1938. Hitler spoke to the German people last night. If Benesch doesn't accept his offer, we'll move in on October the 1st. That means war. Diary, Wednesday, September the 28th, 1938. Tomorrow, a meeting in Munich between Hitler, Daladier, Chamberlain, and Mussolini. Henriette Schneider, housekeeper, East Prussia.
In spite of the harshness and ruthlessness I thought I saw in his face, I got the impression that here was a man who could be relied upon when he had given his word. Neville Chamberlain, British Prime Minister, letter to his sister.
Diary, Friday, September the 30th, 1938. The negotiations in Munich have had a happy ending. The Czechs have to pull out of the Sudetenland tomorrow. Hitler, our Prince of Peace. Henriette Schneider.
The genius of the Führer and his determination not to shrink, even in the face of war, have again achieved victory without the use of force. Alfred Jodl, Major General.
In Munich, the failed putsch of 1923 was celebrated with great pomp. The SS marched through all over the city. The radio announced the death of the diplomat. Edgar Furchtwanger.
Die Feierlichkeiten am 9. November in München fanden ihren Abschluss mit der Vereidigung der SS-Anwärter auf dem Platz vor der Feldherrnhalle in Anwesenheit des Führers.
Hitler, Treue und Tapferkeit. Ich gelobe dir, Gehorsam bis in den Tod. So wahr wir Gott helfe.
On Monday, November the 7th, 1938, the stateless 17-year-old Jewish boy Grünspan goes to the German embassy, demands to speak with one of the counselors, is taken to the duty counselor vom Rat, and shoots him. Grünspan describes the motive for the act as wanting to take revenge for his fellow believers, for the Polish Jews forced out of Germany. Walter Tausk, German Jew, Wroclaw, diary.
Following a traditional march to the Feldherrnhalle, at a social evening of NS party leaders and old comrades, Joseph Goebbels announces the death of Ernst vom Rath.
I go to the party reception in the old town hall. Very busy. I report the matter to the Führer. He orders,
"Withdraw the police. The Jews should for once feel the people's anger."
Joseph Goebbels, diary.
Diary, November 1938. In the night that brings the news of the death, a pogrom breaks out all over Germany. All the synagogues are on fire, windows are smashed in all the Jewish shops, the wares destroyed. Apartments are broken into. Thousands of Jewish men are arrested and locked up in concentration camps. Käthe Kollwitz, painter and sculptress.
When that segment of the population that had not taken part either as police or SA awoke after the fatal night and saw the destruction that had taken place, a sequence unfolded that its instigators had not expected. An unmistakable, deep sense of depression and shame seized the public. People said, "I'm ashamed to be a German." Rudolf Bing, German Jewish businessman, Nuremberg.
Diary, December the 6th, 1938. A boycott has been issued against Jews throughout the Reich. The ban against Jews in Berlin applies to all theatres, cinemas, cabarets, concert and lecture halls, museums, fairs, the radio tower, the Deutschlandhalle and the Sportpalast. In addition, all outdoor and indoor swimming pools, as well as from Wilhelmstraße and Vossstraße to the Reich Monument and the Zeughaus. Erich Ebermeier, writer.
Harassed by the Nazi authorities, around 120,000 German and Austrian Jews succeed in leaving their homeland by the beginning of the Second World War.
Diary, January the 1st, 1939. A new year. Ah, may it be a year of peace. Thea Sternheim, art collector and author.
On the 13th of February 1939, Hitler tells a few confidants that he intends to take action against the Czechs in mid-March. German propaganda is adjusted accordingly.
Diary. Berlin, March the 14th, 1939. Nighttime. Foreign broadcasters are reporting that the Czechoslovak President Hacha arrived in Berlin today and was received by Hitler. Does this mean war, after all? Erich Ebermeier.
In the meantime, I dealt with the transcription of the statement of just a few lines, reading, "The Czechoslovak president has declared that he has trustingly placed the fate of the Czech people and country in the hands of the Führer of the German Reich." The Führer accepted this declaration and expressed his intention of taking the Czech people under the protection of the German Reich and guaranteeing them autonomous development of their ethnic life suited to their character. Paul Otto Schmidt, interpreter for Adolf Hitler.
For 3 hours, Hitler conducted a discussion with the president of Czechoslovakia. We all knew that it was about war or peace. Suddenly the door opened. Hitler rushed out and proclaimed,
"So, people, good news. Hacha has signed the agreement. I will go down as the greatest German in history."
Christa Schröder, Hitler's private secretary.
Letter to Elizabeth Wagner, March the 15th, 1939, evening. The Führer drove to Prague at 4 o'clock this afternoon. He is staying in Prague Castle. In the morning, there will be a parade. His dream is thus fulfilled. Eduard Wagner, Artillery General.
Secret report to Ambassador Josef Lipski in Berlin. Everyone is awaiting further steps from Hitler. It is generally assumed that after the annexation of Memel, he has to move on to the settlement demands with Poland, primarily the takeover of Danzig and the corridor. The solution to these questions will meet with understanding and recognition by the German people. Felix Tyszewski, Polish General Consul.
Letter to his wife, Vita Sackville-West, April the 20th, 1939. There is a break in the crisis, which makes me uneasy. That is one of the worst things with this tension. If Hitler doesn't do anything, we all become uneasy. And if he does do something, we all get frightened. Harold Nicholson, Member of Parliament, National Labour Party.
The summer was winding down. The weather was warm and sultry, and Danzig's numerous cafes, beer and wine gardens were filled with Germans enjoying themselves, despite all the talk of imminent war. It was difficult to conceive of such folks going to war or causing war to break out over them. William Shirer, correspondent for the Columbia Broadcast System in Berlin.
August the 13th, 1939. Obersalzberg. Paul Otto Schmidt, interpreter of Adolf Hitler. Hitler was completely set on war.
The British are guilty of everything. The Poles have a serious lesson to learn. The democracies are inferior to Germany and will never fight.
Was the recurring keynote of the German dictator's speeches. The next day, the Italian Foreign Minister Ciano was received at the Burghof. Hitler spoke the following sentence at this event.
I am firmly convinced that neither England nor France will enter into a general war.
On August the 19th, Käthe and Erich Höse from Leipzig begin their honeymoon with a canoe trip on the Oder River in Upper Silesian Ratibor. They take Erich's camera. For 12 days, the newlywed Leipzigers paddle down the Oder. During this time, Adolf Hitler propels the continent into a world war.
Diary, Paris, August the 19th, 1939. Announcement of a German-Russian non-aggression pact. Thea Sternheim.
At the end of July, on Hitler's approval, Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop and State Secretary von Weizsäcker set the foundations for an agreement with the Soviet Union, which also includes the partitioning of Poland and the Baltic states. Hitler is in a hurry because he believes autumn rains will prevent a motorized war in backward Poland.
On August the 19th, Stalin accepted Hitler's offer with both hands after Hitler had suggested splitting the Baltic into spheres of influence. I noted, but if Ribbentrop travels to Moscow, it means Russia is inviting Hitler to invade Poland. Ernst von Weizsäcker, Secretary of State at the Foreign Office, Memoirs.
Telegram to the German Chancellor, Herr A. Hitler, August the 21st, 1939. I thank you for your letter. I hope that the German-Soviet non-aggression pact will be a turning point and a serious improvement in political relations between our countries. J. Stalin.
Addressed to the Commanders-in-Chief of the military, August the 22nd, 1939. It was becoming clear to me that a dispute with Poland might take place at an unfavourable time. Here is the basis for this finding. It depends essentially on me, on my existence, on my political ability, for it is a fact that probably no one will ever have the trust of the entire German people as I do. In the future, there will probably never be a man who has more authority than I. My presence, therefore, is of great value, but I can be eliminated at any time by a criminal or by an idiot. Adolf Hitler.
Suffocatingly humid days full of fear and expectations. Very calm, now only a few cars, but trains, almost without a break, whistling shrilly. You can't do anything, can't think, can't feel anything other than no war. Marie-Louise Kaschnitz, author, notes.
On August the 30th, Käthe and Erich Höse reached the delta of the Oder River and Stettin, the harbour. Government cruise liners are anchored here, placed under the protection of the Red Cross as hospital ships. 2 days after the honeymooners arrive in Stettin, the Second World War begins. Erich Höse becomes a soldier on September the 1st.
Diary, Wednesday, August the 30th, 1939. In the afternoon, troops equipped for war passed for hours, heading for the border. Poland has declared mobilization. Henrietta Schneider, East Prussia.
Private War Diary, General Franz Halder. Demands of the Führer on the military leadership. Destruction of Poland equals elimination of its living power. It is not about achieving a specific line or a new border, but about destroying the enemy. The means are of little concern.
It is disturbing to see the amount of responsibility that he bears and accepts. Eduard Wagner.
Message from Commander of Westerplatte Peninsula to Polish Navy Headquarters in Gdynia, September the 1st, 1939, 0450. At 0445, the armored cruiser Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Westerplatte with all its guns. The barrage continues. Henryk Zukarski, Major of the Polish Army.
Morning, 10 a.m., Reichstag session. Hitler appears, deadly serious. For the first time in field grey uniform. Members of Parliament rise silently. Then Hitler speaks without notes, describing the events of the last days. Then comes a sentence.
Since 5:45 a.m., we have been returning fire.
Rudolf Jordan, provincial NSDAP leader.
Address before the Reichstag, September the 1st, 1939. I have once more put on that coat that was most sacred and dear to me. I will not take it off again until victory is secured, or I will not survive the outcome.
In the early hours, 4 a.m., of September the 3rd, I was accordingly instructed by His Majesty's government to arrange for a meeting with the Minister for Foreign Affairs at 9 a.m. I accordingly handed the final ultimatum from His Majesty's government to Dr. Schmidt at precisely 9 a.m., pointing out that, unless satisfactory assurances were received by His Majesty's government before 11 a.m. British summer time of the suspension of all the German forces from Poland, a state of war would exist between our two countries, as from that hour. Neville Henderson, British Ambassador to Germany.
Paul Otto Schmidt, Chief Interpreter at the Foreign Ministry, experiences. Then I took the ultimatum to the Chancellery. Hitler's most prominent people were gathered in the room in front of his office. "What news?" asked anxious voices. I answered with a shrug, schools cancelled, and entered the next room where Hitler was sitting at his desk, while Ribbentrop stood at the window. I remained some distance from Hitler's desk and slowly translated the ultimatum of the British government. When I finished, there was total silence. Hitler sat as though turned to stone, just looking straight ahead. After a while, he turned to Ribbentrop.
"What now?"
Ribbentrop replied with a quiet voice,
"I suppose the French will issue an identical ultimatum within the hour."
As my job was now finished, I left and told those waiting outside, in 2 hours, a state of war will exist between England and Germany. Goering turned to me and said,
"If we lose this war, then may heaven have mercy on us."
War Diary, September the 13th, 1939. The Führer's motorcade roared by. We saw our Führer. He was going to the front. Gerhard M., soldier, Flensburg.
Some 16,000 members of the German armed forces die, and 30,000 are wounded in the Polish campaign of 1939. Sources report 68,000 dead and 130,000 wounded on the Polish side. Tens of thousands of Polish civilians are killed in the course of the 5-week conflict.
Diary, September the 28th, 1939. Warsaw has finally fallen. Mountains of corpses have to be removed. The Russians are marching into Poland and are moving up to an agreed demarcation line. Scattered Polish divisions are leading a heroic, desperate struggle. Udo from Alvensleben, Captain, 16th Tank Division.
The next day in Warsaw, troops paraded in front of Hitler. The Lanchner brothers filmed him. I was standing near Hitler and saw how the troops looked at him, mesmerized. Without exception, they appeared ready to do anything for him. If he were to give the order, they would die for him. Leni Riefenstahl, director and actress.
Führer spoke at length and in detail about the ongoing incorporation of the former provinces of Posen and West Prussia. The social strata thought to be racially valuable could be Germanized. In principle, they would have to look racially pure and have the right hereditary disposition. A special cultural heritage group would be created. Here, language would be the most important factor. He said he wasn't interested in the Polish intelligentsia, as they were the supporters of Polish nationalism. Gerhard Engel, Army Adjutant to Hitler, memoirs in diary form.
At lunchtime on May the 9th, we left Berlin in great secrecy and travelled at first light towards Hamburg. Turned the train around and arrived in Aachen at 3 a.m. Under a beautiful starry sky, we went by car to the command post of the Führer's headquarters, the Felsennest or Rocky Eyrie. Wilhelm Keitel, Supreme High Commander of the Armed Forces. Memoirs. In the first Armed Forces report at noon on May the 10th, I had recorded the sentence, "The Führer has personally taken over supreme command of the German army operating in the West." I wrestled with him for half an hour over the approval of this publication. He declared he wanted to remain anonymous and not diminish the glory for the generals. I did not let up, and in the end he gave in. Wilhelm Keitel.
Hitler took the credit for the success of the Western campaign. Albert Speer, Memoirs.
Diary, Friday, May the 10th, 1940. Now the war has really begun. Chamberlain has stepped down and Churchill replaced him. One bad person has left, and a much worse one has come. Henrietta Schneider.
Thus, then, on the night of the 10th of May, at the outset of this mighty battle, I acquired the chief power in the state. I cannot conceal that I was conscious of a profound sense of relief. I felt as if I were walking with destiny, and that all my past life had been but a preparation for this hour and for this trial. Winston Churchill, The Second World War.
May the 23rd, 1940. We've done it. The Air Force is destroying the English on the beach. I was able to persuade Hitler to stop the army. The Führer wants this to be a lesson for them. Hans Jeschonek, Chief of the General Staff of the Air Force to Erhard Milch, State Secretary of the Aviation Ministry.
Diary, Friday, June the 14th, 1940. News at 1 o'clock at night. Paris occupied by our troops without a fight. Flag raised for 3 days. Henrietta Schneider.
France offered a ceasefire on June the 17th. I've never seen Hitler as happy as on that day. Heinz Linger, valet to Adolf Hitler.
France's peace offer was submitted to him while he stood surrounded by his officers. He slapped his thigh in a lively gesture. We were to one side and observed the scene that Walter Franz also filmed. Christa Schröder. He was my boss.
Heinrich Hoffmann, photographer. Keitel, who was carried away by an outburst of emotion, coined the fatal phrase,
"My Führer, you are the greatest military commander of all time."
Franz Halder, Chief of the General Staff. Part of Hitler's growing self-deification after the first military successes involved believing it himself.
Hitler was at the height of his power. He was the master of Europe. Gustav Mannerheim, Field Marshal of Finland.
Germany had air supremacy over Europe. An invasion of Great Britain seemed to be in the offing. Ernst von Weizsäcker.
A stay of a few days in the English capital was all that was needed to recognize the difference between London and Paris. Here, no one was considering capitulation. Julius Deutsch, Austrian socialist of Jewish descent, in exile. Memoirs.
It was only after France had been flattened out that Britain, thanks to her island advantage, developed out of the pangs of defeat and the menace of annihilation a national resolve equal to that of Germany. Winston Churchill.
Diary, Saturday, July the 20th, 1940. Hitler spoke in the Reichstag, made an offer of peace to England. Henrietta Schneider.
Memoirs in diary form, November the 4th, 1940, Reich Chancellery. An unpleasant meeting at headquarters, attended by Göring, von Brauchitsch, Keitel. Due to English and other press reports, Führer for the first time doubts the successes of the Luftwaffe and the strike figures. Führer visibly depressed. Have the impression that he doesn't know how to proceed. Gerhard Engel.
The Führer and the Supreme Commander of the German Army, the Führer headquarters, absolutely top secret, for officers only, 9 copies, second copy, order number 21, Operation Barbarossa. Even before the end of the war against England, the German army has to be prepared to overthrow Soviet Russia in a quick campaign, Operation Barbarossa. The bulk of the Russian army in Western Russia should be destroyed in bold operations via tank pincer movements in order to prevent the withdrawal of strong combat units into the expanses of the Russian interior.
Adolf Hitler.
Memoirs in diary form, December the 18th, 1940. The order for Barbarossa has been issued. The Army Supreme Commander has ordered us to find out whether the Führer wants armed engagement or is just bluffing. In my opinion, Führer himself still doesn't know how to proceed. He hopes the English will capitulate and doesn't believe the USA will enter the war. Gerhard Engel.
Diary, Monday, June the 9th, 1941. There's a big operation here. The streets are full of military of every kind on their way to the border. Henrietta Schneider, East Prussia.
When he decided on the Eastern Campaign in the summer of 1941, he told Eva Braun he had to travel to Berlin for a few days. Christa Schröder.
When Adolf heard the music of Wagner, he was transformed. Then he lost his fierceness. He became quiet, flexible, manageable. The unease disappeared from his face. What had moved him during the day vanished. August Kubitschek, childhood friend.
Wagner's music became second nature to him. Ernst Hanfstengel, until 1937, head of the NSDAP Foreign Press Bureau.
He loved the Wagner opera the most. Other than that, symphonies by Beethoven and Bruckner, or songs by Richard Strauss. Of the light entertainment pieces, he appreciated The Bat and The Merry Widow. Bormann proved his musical knowledge just by changing the records. Heinrich Hoffmann.
It was almost always the same repertoire that Hitler had them play. The only popular song Hitler allowed was the Donkey Serenade, which often concluded the concert. Gertraud Traudl-Junge, Hitler's private secretary.
You'll be hearing that a lot in the near future. It'll be the victory fanfare for our Russian campaign. How do you like it? Adolf Hitler to Albert Speer after listening to the first bars of Les Préludes by Franz Liszt. The Russian fanfare, June the 21st, 1941.
Diary, Saturday, June the 21st, 1941. Wild rumours are coming from the border. Henrietta Schneider.
War Diary of the Army Group North, June the 22nd, 1941. Beginning of the invasion, 3:05 a.m. The entire front of the Army Group crossed the border. Robert Freiherr von Griesenbeck, Major.
Is he mad, this Hitler? He could have allied himself with England's Chamberlain against communist Russia, or with communist Russia against the Anglo-Saxon capitalist world. But he invaded both. Yes, he is mad. Thank God. Klaus Mann, A Life's Report.
Christa Schröder. It all began so promisingly. In the first 2 days in the Wolfschanze, we experienced the boss standing in front of a large map of Europe and pointing to Moscow, saying,
"In a few weeks we'll be in Moscow. There's no doubt about that. And then I'll raise Moscow to the ground. I'll build a reservoir there. The name Moscow has to be erased completely.
Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the Armed Forces High Command, to Field Marshal Fedor von Bock on July the 25th, 1941. The speedy collapse of Russia is vital for German interests, since Russia cannot be subjugated. The Führer was concerned about this situation and asked, worriedly,
"How much time do I have left to finish off Russia, and how much time do I still need?"
Russia, Army Group South, letter, 1941. It is our war. Not, as the enemy propaganda likes to call it, Hitler's war. They don't know that Hitler is one of us, a soldier like us. We know that he would do everything in his power for us. That gives us unlimited trust. The Führer leaves no comrade in the lurch, and when he doesn't help, it's because there was something more important. Horst Rochel, regimental doctor from Kassel.
Diary, October the 10th, 1941, 11:30 p.m. It's snowing in Russia now, something we can't deal with well. Eduard Wagner, Quartermaster General.
There is a winter, you know, in Russia. For a good many months, the temperature is apt to fall very low. There is snow, there is frost, and all that. Hitler forgot about this Russian winter. He must have been very loosely educated. We all heard about it at school, but he forgot it. Winston Churchill.
Diary, Thursday, December the 11th, 1941. Around 3 o'clock, we listened to the Führer from the Reichstag. The war with America is also official now. The Führer will make sure everything turns out well. Henrietta Schneider.
When the German army, surprised by the terrible winter of 1941-42, got stuck in the Russian ice and snow, Hitler was frequently depressed. But as before, he hoped for a quick victory.
There is only a very thin veil that we have to penetrate. We have to be patient. The Russian resistance will not hold.
Christa Schröder.
On December the 17th, I visited the generals commanding the 14th and 47th Tank Corps, as well as the 7th Army Corps, to again learn about the condition of the troops. The three generals reported that the troops were beginning to have doubts about the high command. Black ice making all movement difficult. The Russians are prepared and equipped for winter, and we have nothing. Heinz Guderian, Colonel General.
Franz Halder, War Diary, December the 17th, 1941. Midnight, summoned to the Führer.
Disengagement is out of the question. The enemy has only made deep incursions in a few places. Setting up a rear echelon is illusory. The front is suffering in only one respect. The enemy has more soldiers. He has no more artillery. He is much worse off than we are. Adolf Hitler, Oral Order to Army Group Center, December the 16th, 1941. Commanders, unit leaders and officers are to take personal steps to force troops to engage in fanatical resistance to hold their position, without regard to enemy breakthroughs on the flank or in the rear. Only with this kind of warfare can we gain the time necessary to get reinforcements from the homeland and the West that I have ordered.
Diary, January the 11th, 1942. How meek our military communiques have become. Friedrich Kellner, court employee, Laubach, Hesse.
But the burden of work and increasing concerns from setbacks in the course of the war eroded Hitler's health. From the winter of 1941-1942 onwards, Morel monitored him day and night. In the end, Hitler began having mysterious injections almost every day. Christa Schröder.
Diary, Berlin, March the 3rd, 1942. The hallmarks of the situation: further erosion of the German forces in Russia, slow further deterioration of the economic and food situations in Germany. Ulrich von Hassel, diplomat and member of the German resistance.
From Rostov-on-Don, several waves of retreat rolled through our area in the summer of 1942. The oil tanks were opened, wheat fields torched, also that they wouldn't fall into the hands of the enemy. On August the 3rd, 1942, German scouts surfaced on motorbikes. Within 3 days, German troops moved into Privolnoye. Soviet troops are scattered. But beyond Nalchik, barrier units worked to carry out Order number 227 from Stalin. Not one step back. Mikhail Gorbachev, schoolboy.
War Diary, July the 30th, 1942, day 404. In the bow of the River Don, west of Stalingrad, the 6th Army of Army Group B is engaged in a fierce battle, and the situation is at present unclear. Franz Halder.
I wanted to come to the Volga, to a specific place and a specific city. Adolf Hitler, address at the traditional gathering in the Munich Bürgerbräukeller, November the 9th, 1942.
On September the 11th, I was ordered to report to the frontline staff under Khrushchev. They told me to take over the 62nd Army. My orders were, defend Stalingrad. After I accepted the order, Nikita Khrushchev asked me, "How do you see this?" I said, "I understand the order very well. I'll try to carry it out. Either I defend Stalingrad or I die doing so." I got in the car and drove to Stalingrad. Vasily Chuikov, Lieutenant General, the Stalingrad Protocols.
The high point of the war had been reached. Something unimaginable overpowered the wildest dreams. The North Cape, Pyrenees, Sahara and Volga formed the boundaries of a sphere of influence created overnight. For sure, there were bigger empires, but this one included Europe and its nations. There was no reason for joy. You knew what lay ahead for us because the disproportion of forces was obvious. Udo from Alvensleben, Army Captain, Diary.
We knew that Hitler wouldn't stop and would keep throwing military forces at the front. But he sensed that it was not a battle for life being fought here, but rather a battle to the death. Vasily Chuikov.
I feel entitled to demand that every German soldier should sacrifice his life. Adolf Hitler to Heinz Guderian on December the 20th, 1940, 3:30 p.m.
Diary, Sunday, November the 8th, 1942. The Führer spoke from the Munich Hofbräukeller. He laid into the war criminals again. The Americans landed in Algiers during the night. Henrietta Schneider.
Dr. Theo Morel, Adolf Hitler's personal physician. Diary, December the 15th, 1942. Patient A, sleeping badly because of the military situation. profundo.
Up until the very end, the soldiers believed Hitler's promise that he would get them out of the encirclement. I knew that this was a terrible lie. Bernd Freitag von Loinghofen, Major, flown out of the Stalingrad siege.
Interrogation protocol of prisoner Hermann Strothmann, Lieutenant Adjutant of the 1st Battalion of the 79th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, born 1918 in Münster, Catholic. Men reached the limits of their endurance, and this limit was reached on February the 2nd. We surrendered spontaneously. Around 6 o'clock in the morning, I was told that Russian tanks had arrived. I began to cry, walked out of the shelter, and laid down my weapon.
At what point is one allowed to view the war as lost? As I see it, very late. Albert Speer, the Kranzberg Protocols.
Adolf Hitler neither finished school nor had any vocational training. He occasionally lived in homeless shelters or on the street. He refused to pursue a regular job. To this day, it seems inexplicable that he could come to power. Out of nowhere, Hitler became the Führer, leader of the German Reich, one of the most powerful men of the 20th century, who brought the world to the brink of disaster and death to millions of people. The nation worshipped him and followed him blindly into the abyss. But during his lifetime, he kept his origins and his life secret. No one should know how or who he was. Hitler's contemporaries, from his birth to his death, flesh out the picture. Who was Hitler?
His mother went to Mass with little Paula every Sunday. I can't recall that Adolf accompanied his mother to church once. August Kubitschek, childhood friend of Adolf Hitler in Linz.
Hitler had no emotional connection to the church. He thought the Christian religion was an outdated, hypocritical, people-ensnaring institution. Christa Schröder, Hitler's private secretary.
If the people think I'm a religious man, that cannot hurt.
Adolf Hitler to photographer Heinrich Hoffmann.
I can say with certainty that even before my departure, I learned about Hitler's intention to liquidate patients with incurable diseases, not only incurable mental patients in the event of war. His reasoning was that these would be unnecessary mouths to feed. Fritz Wiedemann, personal adjutant of the NSDAP to Adolf Hitler until January the 19th, 1939.
Memoirs in diary form. August the 8th, 1939. Today we witnessed something cruel. Purler and Bormann showed Hitler the euthanasia film Unworthy Life.
It deals with the life and behavior of incurable mental patients in a number of sanatoriums. There was a long discussion afterwards. The Führer had a really harsh attitude. If he had such a child, he would request that it be put out of its misery, not least for the sake of fellow humans. Gerhard Engel, Army Adjutant to Hitler.
For many of Adolf Hitler's crimes, no documents exist that verify his direct and immediate responsibility. It is different with the centrally organized killing of the mentally handicapped, referred to as euthanasia. Sometime in early October 1939, Adolf Hitler signs a backdated order for September the 1st, the day of the start of the war. With his signature, he authorizes Philipp Buhler, the chief of the Führer's chancellery, and Hitler's young personal physician, Karl Brandt.
Reich leader Buhler and Dr. Brandt are entrusted with the responsibility of extending the authority of physicians so that patients who, on the basis of human judgment, are considered incurable can be accorded mercy killing after a definitive diagnosis.
Adolf Hitler.
One day, we were surprised by a report that a euthanasia operation was underway in Swabia. Family members received the ashes with the official notice that the beloved deceased had unfortunately died quite suddenly of pneumonia or from an infectious disease. Through faulty communication of such condolences and sometimes double deliveries of urns, unrest was created among the population and the clergy. Reinhard Spitzi, Austrian member of the SS and NSDAP.
The Bishop of Münster, Clemens August Graf von Galen, finds the courage to deliver a frank opinion in public.
Sermon in St. Lambert's Church, Münster, August 3rd, 1941. So now we must expect that poor, defenseless, sick people will be killed sooner or later. Do you, or do I, only have the right to live as long as we are recognized as productive by others? If it is legitimate to kill unproductive members of the community, then woe betide our brave soldiers who return home from war with serious battle wounds as invalids. If the principle that man is entitled to kill his unproductive fellow man is established and applied, then woe betide all of us when we become aged and thus unproductive. Clemens August Graf von Galen, Bishop of Münster.
Von Galen's brave protest is based on concrete critical points and is successful. The conflict between the Hitler regime, the Bishop of Münster, and other public critics is settled only partially. Hitler suspends the largest part of the euthanasia program for more than a year, after more than 70,000 people had been killed. In less conspicuous forms, the euthanasia program was reintroduced to sanatoriums and nursing homes and practiced right up to the end of the war.
The Führer called me into the Reich Chancellery at 4 p.m. today. To start with, he spent a whole hour describing the campaign in Poland. The Poles, only a thin Germanic layer. Underneath that, dreadful stock. The Jews, the worst that you could possibly imagine. Only a master's heavy hand could rule here. Alfred Rosenberg, Director of the Foreign Policy Office of the NSDAP.
Two days later, I went to the Warsaw Ghetto. A brick wall about 8 feet high had been built around the entire desolate area, from which all the Aryans had been evacuated and into which more than 400,000 Jews had been forced. The entire population of the ghetto seemed to be living in the street. There was hardly a square yard of empty space. As we picked our way across the mud and rubble, the shadows of what have once been men or women flitted by us in pursuit of someone or something, their eyes blazing with some insane hunger or greed. Frequently, we pass by corpses lying naked in the streets. Jan Karski, courier of the Polish underground.
For a long time, researchers and prosecutors searched for a definitive written order from Hitler for the murder of European Jews. Such an order from Hitler on the final solution of the Jewish question obviously doesn't exist.
Service calendar Heinrich Himmler. Himmler's lecture notes. Führer Headquarters, Führer, Wolfschanze, July the 18th, 1941, 4 p.m. Jewish question, exterminators partisans. Restructuring of the Waffen-SS.
In any case, I'm totally convinced, even without written proof, that the extermination of the Jews goes back to a specific order from Hitler, because it's unthinkable that Himmler and Göring would have carried this out without his knowledge. Nikolaus von Below, Luftwaffe Adjutant to Adolf Hitler.
Immediately after the invasion of the Soviet Union by the Wehrmacht, the 3,000-man death squads of security police and the Reich Security Service begin their killing operations. The political responsibility lies with Hermann Göring, to whom Hitler has transferred the coordination of Jewish policy.
If I am asked whether I knew about the shooting of the Jews, I have to say that I received an order to attend the shooting of Jews as a spectator. I remember that we had to be at the shooting site at 8 p.m. A Navy Captain Lipaya.
Around noon, an old man from Lower Saxony, Colonel Scheer, visited me. Among the things he talked about that were especially horrible was the shooting of Jews. He'd been told by another colonel, Tippelskirch, I believe. Ernst Junge, Captain, Paris, Diary.
I saw a long, deep ditch. SS men and Latvian police, in plain clothes wearing armbands, were standing beside it. The terrain was overgrown with bushes, and the ground was sandy. We watched about 1.5 hours of the execution. During this time, 3 to 4 trucks were brought in from the city to the shooting site. Then the victims were driven like cattle from the truck to the ditch. Each time, 5 had to march in single file into the ditch. The shooting took place under the command of the SS. The victims stood facing us. I can remember exactly that after the salvos, the victims collapsed. A Navy Captain Lipaya.
Letter to the SS and Latvian Police Chief, Commander of the Riga Police Force, January the 3rd, 1942. The execution of the Jews carried out in the time frame of the report is still the talk of the local population. The fate of the Jews is deplored numerous times, and at the moment, you hear few people in favor of their elimination. Among other things, there is a rumor circulating that the execution was filmed. SS and Police Chief Lipaya.
Memoirs in diary form. A grim, gloomy mood. Führer had a long discussion with Himmler, and afterwards there was the usual corresponding atmosphere. Gerhard Engel.
Hitler never told me anything about the treatment of the Jews. In foreign policy, the subject only arose when the Jews were to be deported from some country or other. Franz von Sonnleitner, NSDAP member, after 1939 legation counselor in the Foreign Ministry.
Adolf Hitler addressed to the traditional gathering in the Munich Bürgerbräukeller, November the 8th, 1942. You will recall the Reichstag session at which I declared, if Judaism imagines for a moment that it can bring about an international world war for the extermination of the European races, the result will not be the extermination of the European races, but the extermination of the Jews in Europe. I was always derided as a prophet. Countless numbers of those who laughed at the time are no longer laughing today. Those who are still laughing now will perhaps not be laughing much longer.
Danziger Vorposten Daily Newspaper, May the 13th, 1944. Jewry records major losses in other regions of Europe. The core areas of Jewish settlement that we found in Poland, like those in Warsaw and Lublin, have today been neutralized. The settlements of 1.5 million Jews in Hungary are currently being dealt with in a similar fashion. Thus, in these countries alone, 5 million Jews have been eliminated. In other European countries, long-standing state measures against Jewry are also increasing. Wilhelm Löbsack, provincial NSDAP propaganda director in Gdansk, West Prussia.
During a military briefing around autumn 1944, the Reich press chief Dietrich came up with an English report. In this newspaper article, it was alleged that the Russians had taken a German concentration camp by the name of Majdanek. Pictures showed racks, on which a large number of combs could be seen, well laid out, as foreigners expect to see in a German institution. The text said that people had been exterminated here. Dietrich presented the press report to Hitler. We stood there with bated breath to hear what he would say. The answer was swift.
Those are the hands of Belgian children chopped off during the First World War. It's nothing but enemy propaganda.
I believe that I have quoted Hitler's statement correctly. In any case, we were all relieved. Franz von Sonnleitner, after 1939 legation counselor in the Foreign Ministry.
On the third day of the war, I was wounded near Grodno. When I came to, there were many wounded lying on the ground. We were at the mercy of the German soldiers. After a while, those who could move were driven onwards. My comrades grabbed me under the arms because those who fell down were immediately shot. Dmitry Dmitrienko.
Since February 1938, Adolf Hitler has been the supreme commander of the military. In this capacity, he's responsible for the mass killings of Soviet prisoners of war. Whereas 1 to 3% of Anglo-American prisoners die, some 50% of Red Army prisoners perish. Of the roughly 5.3 to 5.7 million Red Army soldiers in German captivity, 2.5 to 3.3 million die. Estimates vary.
Only the gravediggers were given food. The camp was set up in a dense forest, a pine forest. We scratched the bark off with a nail and fed ourselves that way. After a while, the whole forest had been eaten. Boris Sheremet.
Army Command is fully aware of the situation and condones the starvation of Soviet prisoners. In November 1941, when the chiefs of staff of the East Armies tell the Quartermaster General that the armies need Soviet prisoners as laborers, but that these are starving in camps, he states,
"Prisoners of war who do not work have to starve. Working prisoners of war can, in some cases, be fed army provisions. Eduard Wagner, Quartermaster General.
Letter to Wilhelm Keitel. The fate of the Soviet prisoners of war is a tragedy of huge proportions. The large majority of them have starved or died from exposure to the weather. Alfred Rosenberg, Minister for the Occupied Eastern Territories.
Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the Armed Forces High Command. Such doubts belong to soldierly concepts of chivalrous warfare. Here we are dealing with the destruction of an ideology. For this reason, I approve and support these measures.
I keep hearing that Hitler could not have known about everything. This is sheer nonsense. I know from personal observation and remarks by Hitler that he knew everything. Heinz Linger, valet to Adolf Hitler.
Up until 1940, Hitler looked younger than he was in reality. After that, however, he aged rather quickly. Up to 1943, he looked his age outwardly. Later, his rapid physical deterioration was obvious. Professor Dr. Hans Karl von Hasselbach, Deputy Attendant Doctor to Adolf Hitler.
The death of a human being didn't bother him at all. He saw people as the links in a long chain, and he considered the first link to be himself. Children were in his eyes only the potential by which the greater or smaller living space of a people was measured. Christa Schröder.
The soldiers that I met were not followers of Hitler and only served the Führer unwillingly, but all approved of war as an indispensable phenomenon of life. The war is the ultimate exertion that you cannot dodge. This picture was deeply ingrained in them. Wilma Sturm, journalist and writer.
Diary, Monday, July the 26th, 1943. Mussolini has resigned. He's said to be ill. Last night, Hamburg, Essen and Kiel were bombed again. Henrietta Schneider.
While I endeavored to establish worthwhile targets to Hitler and the General Staff of the Air Force, our enemies launched 5 big attacks on only one major city, Hamburg. Although this action contradicted all tactical considerations, it had catastrophic consequences. Albert Speer.
Diary of fighter pilot Hans Ahrens, born 1921, killed in action February the 21st, 1944. That first night of terror on July the 25th will remain unforgettable for us and the majority of all Hamburg residents. Personally, I'm glad that I experienced it all. As a soldier, it led to an ultimate, resolute hatred of our enemy.
Letter to Georg Zimmermann, soldier in Norway, from his mother, Hamburg, July the 28th, 1943. Dear Georg, we are still alive, but Hamburg de facto no longer exists. No house left standing, just mountains of rubble, entire streets blocked, dead bodies not salvaged, impenetrable smoke and fumes and fires still burning everywhere. Disintegration is in progress. No police anymore, nothing. Hamburg is lost forever. Magdalena Zimmermann.
When I travelled to the Badine from Babelsberg, I met an acquaintance on the train. He'd experienced it all in Hamburg as an anti-aircraft soldier. It smelled so strongly of corpses that you couldn't get the stench out of your nose. Leaflets were dropped over Hamburg with quotes from the war speeches of Hitler and Goering, without any comments. Erich Kästner, writer, War Diary.
Hamburg, July the 30th, 1943. My Hannele, words can't express what we are going through here. A government that cannot protect its women and children is simply criminal. My Hannele, if I could only hear one word from you and Georg, your mother. Magdalena Zimmermann.
When he travelled to Bavaria to the Berghof, or the Führer headquarters, then he went by train and at night with blacked-out windows, so that he wasn't faced with the devastation from the bombing raids. Bernd Freitag von Loinghofen, Captain.
During the entire war, Adolf Hitler never once visited a bombed city. Albert Speer.
Dr. Theo Morell, Adolf Hitler's personal physician. Diary, September the 23rd, 1943, 8:15 p.m. Examination after dinner. Strong flatulence, spasms from agitation, stomach shows increased fat formation. Prescribed a diet.
He admired Morell and his art and was, in a sense, dependent on him and his medication. Albert Speer.
New Year's Proclamation, 1944. The year 1944 will make hard and heavy demands on all Germans. The monstrous events of the war will come closer to crisis this year. We are fully confident that we will endure.
Adolf Hitler.
Diary, May the 27th, 1944. An impression of an increasingly destroyed Berlin, devastating. At the same time, Berliners are sitting in the sunshine on chairs amid the rubble and debris on the esplanade, as if it were peacetime. Ulrich von Hassel, diplomat and member of the resistance.
Diary, May the 9th, 1944. Patient A, tension headache left side, legs trembling due to agitation. Invasion imminent, but where? Dr. Theo Morell.
The plutocratic world of the West can undertake its threatened landing attempt whenever it wants. It will fail.
Adolf Hitler, Order of the Day to the Wehrmacht.
Hitler was told of the landing on the morning of June the 6th. He expressed relief when he received the first report and said now it would be possible to beat the enemy. Niklaus von Below, Luftwaffe Adjutant to Adolf Hitler.
The conviction of the Germans that we would not attack in the weather then prevailing was a definite factor in the degree of surprise we achieved. In the Omaha sector, an alert enemy division, the 352nd, which prisoners stated had been in the area on maneuvers and defense exercises, accounted for some of the intensive fighting in that locality. Dwight D. Eisenhower, U.S. General, Supreme Allied Commander, Europe.
Heinz Linger, valet to Adolf Hitler. Among Hitler's habits, which despite our efforts couldn't be remedied, was that he kept asking what time it was, above all, during the war.
I'd principally only ever stop at 12:05. Adolf Hitler, in November 1942.
On July the 20th, 1944, I'd received the order to prepare for the move of the operations unit from Mauerwald to Zossen, south of Berlin. It was a hot East Prussian summer's day. Mauerwald was located just 20 kilometers away from the Wolfschanze, where Stauffenberg's bomb exploded around 12:45 p.m. Bernd Freitag von Loinghofen.
I remember thunder combined with a brightly flashing flame. At the same time, thick smoke. After a few seconds of complete silence, I heard someone call. It was probably Field Marshal Keitel.
Where is the Führer?
Heinz Buchholz, stenographer in the Wolfschanze headquarters.
There were agitated calls for a doctor. A bomb exploded. Nothing happened to the boss, but the hut was blown sky high. Christa Schröder.
Heinz Linger. When I arrived, I saw Hitler, who looked at me inquiringly with big eyes and stared at my troubled face. With a calm smile, he said,
Linger, someone tried to kill me.
Diary, Friday, July the 21st, 1944. The radio broadcast details of the attack. The bomb was planted by a Count von Stauffenberg. Around 1 o'clock, the Führer spoke to prove that he had survived. What would have happened if the Führer had died? The war would be over, and there would be revolution in Germany. Henrietta Schneider.
His confidence, his faith in victory and his assurance, but also his power consciousness and delusions of grandeur now exceeded all boundaries of reason. Traudl Junge, Hitler's private secretary.
Personal War Diary, October the 7th, 1944. Morning briefing. Beginning of the attack on East Prussia and Budapest. Long discussion with Göring. Station 12 heavy anti-aircraft batteries immediately to protect the Führer's headquarters. Keitel for relocating to Berlin, Hitler against it. Werner Kreipe, General of the Aviators, Chief of Staff, Luftwaffe.
In the first days of November 1944, we moved out of the Wolfschanze because the Russians were close by. Traudl Junge.
Germany was under intense pressure. At the end of 1944, weapons production fell sharply. Trapped in the east, southeast, south, and west, Germany was strategically encircled and could not break free. Nevertheless, Hitler took one ultimate measure after the other. The Nazis suppressed without mercy the slightest opposition to their regime. It was clear to us that Germany was mobilizing its last forces. But at the end of 1944, Germany was still able to defend itself and put up serious resistance. Its military still consisted of around 17.5 million men, of whom 5.3 million were fighting troops. Georgy Zhukov, Commander-in-Chief, 1st White Russian Front.
At just 19 years old, Walter was also killed in action. I was sitting on the roof of our house that had been damaged in another bombing when I saw the postman bring the death notice. My aunt called through the house, "Walter has fallen." The death of my brother was a deep shock for me. Helmut Kohl, schoolboy.
Speech to division commanders, December the 12th, 1944, in Adlerhorst, near Ziegenberg, Hesse. If we suffer a few more really hard strikes, then this artificially maintained common front can suddenly collapse at any moment in a huge clap of thunder. Adolf Hitler.
Hitler revealed the following to a very limited circle of listeners.
Due to a noticeable weakness of enemy forces in the Eifel region, he had decided to start the attack from there. The target had to be Antwerp. Siegfried Westphal, Major General, Chief of Staff to the Commander-in-Chief West.
On December the 16th, 1944, General Bradley came to my headquarters to discuss ways and means of overcoming our acute shortages in infantry replacements. Just as he entered my office, a staff officer came in to report slight penetrations of our line. It was through this same region that the Germans launched their Great Attack of 1940. Dwight D. Eisenhower.
German tanks have been spotted north of the city of Luxembourg. Rundstedt has ordered the tanks to advance through the Ardennes in nearly the same place as the Germans penetrated in May 1940. They're heading in the same direction again, to the Channel coastline towards Antwerp, in order to stop the Allies using the port through which their main supplies come. Stefan Heim, Corporal of the U.S. Army, writer.
It was my opinion that it was necessary to play Hitler's last card to maximum effect. As a Gurkha, I tried to get as close as possible to the front. The troops pushing forward were in a good mood because low-hanging clouds prevented any aerial activity. I was worried that the weather would brighten up. Albert Speer, Memoirs.
As long as the weather kept our planes on the ground, it would be an ally of the enemy worth many additional days. Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Our last major offensive in the West, with 300,000 men that was so gloriously successful at the start, failed in the end thanks to 10 days of radiant sunshine. The Anglo-Americans were thus able to deploy their overwhelming air superiority. Léon de Grelle, commander of the Wallonian Waffen-SS.
The Allies had expected to reach the River Rhine by Christmas at the latest. The Ardennes offensive prevented that. But how many men lost their lives due to this senseless delay? Walter Roland, industrialist, commissioner for tank production in Ministry of Armaments and War Production.
Rudolf Jordan, provincial NSDAP leader, defense commissioner, December the 25th, 1944. When we were sitting together one sunny morning, tears appeared in my wife's eyes. Where will we be at Christmas next year? This was the question asked by the mother of our children, the question of the family's fate. This question would be asked in the house of the provincial leader and everywhere else in Germany. I was frightened because I felt that the answer was no longer convincing, but I had to remain the same person, Hitler's deputy, the spokesman of German hope until the end. I know today that it was the belief in a miracle.
In the days after Christmas, it was clear that the expected success would not be achieved. At the end of the year, the offensive had to be seen as a failure. Nikolaus von Below.
Adolf Hitler, at the end of December 1944, to his adjutant Nikolaus von Below. I know the war is lost. Their superiority is too great. I would prefer to put a bullet in my head now. We will never capitulate, never. We can perish, but we'll take the world with us.
December the 31st, 1944, Luxembourg. You sat there with a half-empty glass in your hand and listened to the hoarse voice with the unmistakable accent. 2 or 3 times the speaker almost lost his voice. And he also got his words mixed up, but that was always the case when he got excited. It was significant that his throaty bellow no longer wanted to work that New Year's Eve. Stefan Heim, Corporal of the US Army, writer.
Adolf Hitler, last radio address to the German people, January the 30th, 1945. Thus I now appeal to the entire German people to gird themselves with a yet greater, stronger spirit of resistance, until we can again, as before, put on the graves of the dead of this titanic struggle a wreath inscribed with the words, "And yet you were victorious." I therefore expect every German to fulfill his duty to the utmost, to make every sacrifice that will and must be required.
February the 13th, 1945. The model of Linz is finally finished. The extensive model of the development of the Danube riverbanks was now set up in one of the large, brightly toned basements of the new chancellery. When I led Adolf Hitler into this room, he stood for a long time just looking, as though overwhelmed by the general impression. I moved the spotlight to the position of the sun's rays in the afternoon. Now he was presented with the perspective of how his city on the Danube would look in his retirement. Hermann Giesler, General Building Inspector for the redevelopment of the city of Linz.
Not a day went by when the government quarters were not attacked. When a bomb exploded nearby, the bunker lying in the groundwater swayed noticeably. The light began to flicker, so Hitler raised his voice as if in a dream.
That was close. Those bombs could have hit us.
He was noticeably fearful and didn't feel safe. Christa Schröder.
In mid-March 1945, Hitler transfers nearly all of his activities to the bunker under the Chancellery. Since then, he rarely sees daylight.
Sometime in mid-March, Eva Braun arrived at the Reich Chancellery. Hitler tried his best to get her to go back to Munich, but she made it clear that her place was at Hitler's side, and no one would be able to change her mind. Rochus Misch, telephone operator in the Führer's bunker.
April the 20th, 1945 was always referred to as the date of the last photos and film segments of Hitler and the delegation of the Hitler Youth. This is not true. They are in fact from a different reception of a delegation by Hitler. This took place on March the 20th, 1945. Arthur Axmann, leader of the Hitler Youth.
It was between 3 and 4 a.m. on April the 11th, 1945. Suddenly cries were heard. They grew louder and louder. We stumbled outside to discover the cause. "Look, the gate!" somebody shouted. The crooked swastika had disappeared. Something white fluttered on the flagpole. The delightfully victorious minute for which our German comrades had waited for 4,453 days and nights was finally there. In the evening, an American infantry unit arrived. Thomas Geffer, German Jew, prisoner in Buchenwald.
April the 12th, 1945. It will not be pleasant listening. I propose to tell you of Buchenwald. We reached the main gate. The prisoners crowded up behind the wire. There surged around me an evil-smelling stink. Men and boys reached out to touch me. They were in rags and the remnants of uniforms. Death had already marked many of them, but they were smiling with their eyes. Edward Morrow, radio correspondent for CBS News.
On April the 21st, our troops reached the Berlin Autobahn ring. This success created favourable conditions to totally enclose the fascist capital. Vasily Chuikov, General.
That day I saw Hitler only briefly. The boss could still not believe that the Russians were at the gates. Rohos Mish.
Sechlin, Mecklenburg. Around 11:50 p.m., Hitler calls. He gives a short lecture on the situation and concludes with the words,
"You will see, the Russians will suffer the biggest defeat, the bloodiest defeat in their history before the gates of Berlin."
Karl Koller, Chief of the General Staff of the Luftwaffe.
April the 22nd, 1945. This date marks the end of the Third Reich for me. The German Wehrmacht capitulated on May the 8th, 1945. But on April the 22nd, a Sunday, Hitler capitulated. Rohos Mish.
On April the 22nd, we attended the status report at the usual time in the afternoon. I recognized immediately that clouds as heavy as lead were hanging over the room. Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the Armed Forces High Command. Memoirs.
I have already reached my decision. I won't leave Berlin again. I will defend the city till the end. Either I lead the fighting around the capital of the Reich, or I perish with my soldiers in Berlin and die in the battle for the symbol of the Reich.
Adolf Hitler.
During the status conference, which had been loud and turbulent, Hitler had finally uttered the magical sentence, and since then repeated it to everybody who crept around the bunker disbelievingly.
The war is lost.
Rohos Mish.
Gertraud Traudel-Junge. In the small anteroom, Hitler stands motionless. In a distant and commanding manner, he calls out,
"Get changed at once. In 1 hour, an aircraft will come and take you to the south. Everything is lost, hopelessly lost."
Eva Braun walks up to Hitler, takes both of his hands, and says smilingly and consolingly, as if talking to a sad child,
"But you know that I'm staying here with you. I will not be sent away."
Hitler's eyes begin to light up, and he does something that no one has ever witnessed, not even his most trusted friends and aides. He kisses Eva Braun on the lips.
The German army dissolved before our eyes. Winston Churchill.
Gloom and doom began to spread throughout the bunker. Arthur Axmann.
The Führer comes up to me, shakes my hand and asks,
"Have you rested a little, my child? I'd like to dictate something. Get the shorthand pad."
Gertraud Traudel-Junge.
My private will and testament. As I did not consider that I could take the responsibility of contracting a marriage during the years of fighting, I have now decided, before the closing of my earthly career, to take the girl who, after many years of faithful friendship, entered the practically besieged city of her own free will in order to share her destiny with me as my wife. At her own desire, she goes as my wife with me into death. What I possess belongs, inasmuch as it has any value, to the party. Should this no longer exist, to the state. Should the state also be destroyed, no further decision of mine is necessary. Signed, Berlin, April the 29th, 1945, 4 a.m. Adolf Hitler.
April the 30th, 1945. I had close contact with Mohnke, the commander of the citadel. Mohnke was often with the troops on the front line. On April the 29th, he reported to Hitler that to the north the Russians were a short distance away from Weidendammer Bridge, to the east in Lustgarten, to the south near Potsdamer Platz and the Air Ministry, and to the west in Tiergarten. That was only a few hundred meters from the Chancellery. When Hitler asked him,
"How long can you hold out?"
he answered, 20 to 24 hours at the most. Arthur Axmann.
On April the 30th, 1945, around noon, Bormann told me that Hitler's decision was now firm. Then Hitler said to me that he would now shoot himself and that Fräulein Braun would also take her life. The bodies were to be buried. He assigned me to make the necessary arrangements. Otto Günscher, SS Adjutant to Hitler.
My political testament. I die with a happy heart in the face of the immeasurable deeds and achievements of our soldiers at the front, our women at home, the achievements of our farmers and workers, and the efforts, unique in history, of our youth who bear my name. Above all, I oblige the leaders of the nation and those under them to scrupulously observe the race laws and to offer merciless opposition to the poisoner of all peoples, international jury. Issued in Berlin, this 29th day of April 1945, 4 o'clock a.m. Adolf Hitler.
There cannot be the slightest doubt that Adolf Hitler took his life in the Führer bunker of the Reich Chancellery in Berlin on April the 30th, 1945, with his own hand, namely by a shot in the right temple. Cause of death, District Court 2, Berchtesgaden, December the 8th, 1956.
Valet Heinz Linger reports the hour of his death as 3:50 p.m. He says he noted this time from a grandfather clock in the anteroom to Hitler's office. Adjutant Otto Günscher cites his final hour as 3:30 p.m. He said he'd looked at his watch.
It was not disloyalty, but rather his suicide that put an end to Hitler's organization. He and his organization were one and the same, and thus it ended with him. This man who rose out of nothing had offered himself to Germany at a time when it was longing for a new magnet. He formulated a doctrine based on a mixture of fascism and race theory. The totalitarian system allowed him to act without restraint. The mechanization of the military gave him the trump cards of lightning attacks and surprise. All of this led to repression, and that, in turn, led to these crimes. Charles de Gaulle, Memoirs.